afternoon, everyone. I hope online. Okay, good afternoon, buon pomeriggio. I think we can start. Maybe a few people will join us later, but it's like the academic 15 minutes have passed, so we can start. So we are very glad and honored to have with us Professor Issam Nassar from the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies, currently the chair of the history program, right? And Issam Nassar is here because he has been invited, in fact, at the University of L'Aquila for a conference that will start tomorrow. So we took the occasion to have a small lecture also at L'Orientale, and so I think we should thank also Dario Cutugno to have invited Professor Nassar and to give us this occasion, in fact. Professor Nassar is a historian of Palestine, and also he's working very much on visual history, if we can say that, yes. But also he's starting to be a star in Italy as well, because very recently, I think this year, a book was published. I mean, his book with Maher Sharif was published in Italian by Carocci, a book called I Palestinesi, storia di un popolo e dei suoi movimenti nazionali, mi pare che il titolo reciti così. That was actually a bestseller compared to this kind of books, of course, in Italy. So this is a second reason to be glad to have Issam Nassar with us today. Actually, Maher Sharif also came to Italy like 2 years ago for a tournée, various universities. Last year. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'll give immediately the floor to Professor Nassar, and then we have with us also Mattia Giampaolo, a postdoc researcher from the University La Sapienza of Rome, and also researcher of CESPI, which is a Centro Studi Politica Internazionale, is a research center on international politics based in Rome, which was in the tradition, but a bit far away right now, but started as the Center for Political Studies of the Italian Communist Party, in fact, many years ago. Okay, so we will register the lecture. I forgot to start the registration immediately, but I'll start now.
Recording in progress.
Okay. And then, I don't know if you want, I share your presentation. Okay, here it is. Okay, I guess this is it. And you can control. Right? No, what's that? Okay. I hope people at home, they just can see it. Yeah? Okay. Okay. And you can go. And you can either use this microphone. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for the kind words. The honor is mine to be here, to meet all of you. And of course, thank you, Dario, for the initial invitation. What I would like to talk about, let me start by explaining a couple of things. In 1948, Palestine disappeared. Not a common occurrence for a country to disappear completely, to disappear from the map, its people dispersed. And we know what happened after that. My main argument here is that before Palestine and its people disappeared, and before Palestine was colonized physically by the Zionists, and of course before that by the British, Palestine was already on its way of disappearance and was being colonized by imagination in the European world and what is called sometimes the Western world. And of course, my talk is limited to photography, of course, all sorts of elements, politics, history, etc. But my argument is that Palestine was being emptied of its people and being redefined already from the first half or end of the first half of the 19th century through the medium of photography. And photography, as you know, is a new invention. Forget about our iPhones and all the images we take now, but it was not as simple. It was invented, announced to the world in 1839, and to take a picture was a complicated process. You need to carry all sorts of heavy equipment, glass negatives, chemicals, a tent to instantly develop in the dark tent or dark room, etc. And it was, in a way, a luxury. And early photographers exhibited their work in a variety of places, from the museum to the publications, from the, when publication of photographs became possible, we would see them in, see the images from Palestine in Bibles, Sunday school books, etc. And therefore it was, my work focuses on the early photography of Palestine, which was limited largely to a small number of professional photographers. This is before the photography became accessible in the 1880s when Kodak invented the duplex camera with the celluloid film. So before that, only professional photographers produced images, distributed them, sold them, exhibited them in that sense. So what I'm going to illustrate now is look at a number of 19th century images from different places in Palestine. And let me stress one point, that to the Europeans, whose worldview and historical imagination of Palestine was largely limited to the Bible, be it the New Testament or the Old Testament, be it the Jewish Bible or the Christian Bible, Palestine, generally speaking, was reduced to a few locations. Those were Jerusalem, of course, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Tiberias. That is where the Sea of Galilee is mentioned in the New Testament a lot, where the disciples of Jesus were all fishermen in the Sea of Galilee. So other places were rarely photographed. Some of them were photographed, but rarely, if we talk about volume. So to start with, Palestine was reduced to locations connected to the Bible and reduced to a number of places only. So let's look at some of the, okay. This is not a 19th century photo. I will show you the one after that, but I thought I will start with this one because it's actually from the 1920s. So it's a lot later, but even in the 1920s, National Geographic magazine was still using the same caption that has been used for the last 8 years. And if you look at this picture, you know probably that this is called the Dome of the Rock. It's part of the complex that is known as Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. This building is the oldest Islamic mosque that is still standing in the world. Even Al-Kaaba, the holiest place for Muslims, was burned and rebuilt. But this building emerged like this. There are some changes now, but emerged like this from 692. our common era. So it's a marvelous architectural monument in a way, but if you look at the caption that in this case the National Geographic magazine gave, it says, I don't know if you can read it, but it says site of Solomon's temple, which is something that is persistent in photographing for a very long time and has returned over the last 50 years. Because most of the media now that maybe at some point referred to this place as Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Dome of the Rock, now whenever we hear it in English, it's Temple Mount. So we've gotten out of this representation but back into it, but by different actors and for different reasons. My commentary on early photographers does not suggest that there was a conspiracy and the Zionists planned the whole thing. In fact, photography predated political Zionism, but the construction of a historical imagination of the place in certain ways was beneficial and heavily used later on by the Zionists. So here is the same picture by a photographer called Bonfils, a French photographer who lived in Beirut and opened up a studio in the 1860s, and this picture is from the 1870s. Bonfils was a bit more sophisticated, I suppose, and he wrote a caption that says the Mosque of Omar. The Mosque of Omar is more sensible in a way. There's the word mosque and there's the word Omar, who's an important figure in the Islamic history. But in fact, this is not the Mosque of Omar. This is the Dome of the Rock. The Mosque of Omar is in some other part of the city, but it's not as beautiful, let's call it, or as sexy as this place in a way. And the Mosque of Omar is known because in the history of the relationship between Christianity and Islamdom, the Covenant of Omar is known, that Omar, the Caliph Omar, the third Caliph of Islam, came to Jerusalem, the second Caliph of Islam came to Jerusalem and was invited by the priest, the patriarch, to pray in the church, but he said, no, I will not pray in the church, I will pray outside. Because if I pray here, the Muslims eventually will take it over, and I don't want that to happen. So there is a benevolent story here, which is known to at least some of the audiences or the viewers. So using the term Mosque of Omar kind of, probably sells more, because here again we're talking about photographers but also businessmen, people who wanted to sell their images in a variety of ways. What strikes me about the two images here and there is this is the Al-Aqsa Mosque is roughly, I'm not sure of the number, but you could say maybe 1/5 of the old city of Jerusalem in terms of the space. And the mosque in Islamic cities historically is a place of meeting. Schools were held in the mosque. There are people who actually, visitors from out of town, before the hotels were invented or arrived, stayed in the mosque, slept in the mosque. Travelers, tired people go to the mosque. And add to that, Muslims pray 5 times a day. So a mosque, central mosque like this, should be packed with people. But in all of these images, they managed somehow, whether they hired guards, paid people, I don't know, but they managed to present the place as completely empty and reduce it as a site either of Temple of Solomon or of the Mosque of Omar, both connected with a certain kind of European imagination in some sense. But in all of these cases, especially the Temple of Solomon, an amazing ability to see something that presumably stood there 3,000 years before and be completely blind for what is in front of your eyes. This is an amazing ability that the photographers managed to capture, and today, of course, we relive the same thing, but not with photography. Another image, all of them, different photographers at different times in the 19th century with the same images. The Dome of the Rock here is taken by the photographer Maxime Duchamp. Maxime Duchamp is a famous French photographer who accompanied his friend Gustave Flaubert on their trip to Egypt and Palestine around, I forgot, 1849, I believe. I might be off by 1 or 2 years. And he took pictures in Egypt and photographs in Palestine. In fact, he took only 12 photographs of Palestine. In all of his images in Egypt, as you can see here with Abu Sumbul, is it? Yeah. That there is a man sitting on top. Of course, this is to give you the feeling for the size of the monument. But not a single image in Egypt appears without a person in it. In fact, in his notebook, he talks about the name of the person and how much money he paid him. So he insisted on a presence for whatever reason. But in his 12 images of Palestine, not a single person appears. You could have a person to measure how high the Dome of the Rock or any other monument, but we'll keep that in mind. In other words, a major trend or genre in early photography was to represent Palestine without its people, empty. The second trend is when people appeared in old photographs, including, you see the double take there, that's a stereoscope image where you can see it in a viewer, it becomes 3D. It comes with captions on the back and sometimes a book that tells you the story. But in all of these images in which people appear, they're often appearing representing a certain character or characteristics related to the Bible. So here we see a woman from Nazareth, bringing to mind Mary of Nazareth. A carpenter in Nazareth, bringing to mind Saint Joseph of Nazareth. So we don't know the name of this woman. This is not her photograph. She is in the photo, but it's not her photograph. And the same with the carpenter over there. We also see that often in the image of mother and child, or the Madonna, which could be anywhere, but usually if you want to have a picture of a woman in Palestine, you will most likely need to have a woman and a child that brings to mind again the same story of Virgin Mary. Or in Nablus there is a church called Jacob's Well, and this is presumably, the photo is taken inside there, where we see a woman at the well. And the caption says, this is a Samaritan woman. In the Bible, there is a parable of Jesus and interaction with the Samaritan woman. And a parable is not necessarily a true account, assuming that the Bible or any of the Holy Book is a historical account. But still, it's a story told for some sort of moral. And the woman in the picture, we know the Samaritans. Samaritans are a small group of Jews who only believe in the first 5 books of the Torah, or in the Torah, not in the prophets and the rest. And there is a large or small community, or the largest Samaritan community is in Nablus. So that makes sense. But they dress in a certain way. And this woman is not dressed as a Samaritan, but dressed as a Palestinian peasant, could be Christian or Muslim, from the nearby villages. So even the representation here is, there was sloppy attempts to make things look authentic. It doesn't matter, the viewers are Europeans at the end of the day. In the genre of the stereoscope, we continue to see this. If it's not a Samaritan woman, or in Nablus, or a woman in Nazareth, or we have shepherds all the time. And when you have a picture of shepherds, you are told in the caption, this is the shepherds near Bethlehem. Again, going back to the birth of Jesus and the story. And we often see, again, these are from stereoscopes, but I did not want to put too many images in one slide. The first one on that side, on the left, the caption says, Ruth and Boaz. Ruth and Boaz, and I don't, excuse my memory, I don't remember the exact biblical reference to the story, but they belong to the Old Testament. And the woman and the man in the picture, I seriously doubt that their names are Ruth and Boaz. If I have to guess, and I'm sure I'm wrong, but I'll be close, they could be Mahmoud and Fatima, maybe even George and I don't know, Julia or something like this. But Ruth and Boaz are not common names, are not first names that are used anymore. Certainly not Boaz. Or the next picture is fishermen in the Sea of Galilee. Brings to mind Saint Pedro and Peter, fishermen, Matthew, etc. So these are common representations of when people appear in the pictures, they appear as something other than who they are. Again, the Ruth and Boaz, the field of Boaz in this case is another reference to the biblical story. The few occasions when you actually see people in the photographs, groups of people, are places like this. This is a church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It's the holiest site for Christians, at least outside of the Protestant traditional Christianity, where the tomb of Jesus is located, Golgotha, where he was crucified, the whole story. But there's a consistency in referring to these pictures as images of pilgrimage in front of the Holy Sepulchre on Easter. And the next one that doesn't have a caption, in fact, by an American who photographed at the end of the 19th century, published his book in 1901 under the title of A Crusade Through the Holy Land. Sorry, a camera crusade through the Holy Land. And he says, pilgrims and others. I suppose that's a recognition of the people of the land. We are the others. We continue to be. So, pilgrims, of course it's beautiful. These are important images. But to go on pilgrimage has nothing to do with representing a place as inhabited. In India, I think, or in some places in the world, people go to a pilgrimage to a river or to a mountain. They don't live there, they go on pilgrimage, So the act of pilgriming, if that's the right word, is not connected with being in a living space, living place where people live. They have society, they have economy, they have their ideas, their music, their etc., etc. Then it becomes even more absurd when you start to have stereoscopic images like this called On the Road to Jericho, the Good Samaritan. Again, the Good Samaritan is a parable. It's an example that Jesus gave. It's a story he told. It's not an event that actually happened. But to the photographers of the Underwood and Underwood Company from New York, it is a location. There is a place where the Good Samaritan event happened. And they reenact it. In the story, or the parable, a Jew is injured while other Jews pass by and don't pay attention to him, and then the enemy of the Jews passes by, a Samaritan, and he takes care of the, try to heal and help the wounded Jew. So it's a story that Jesus told with, great ideas, of course. But if you look at this image, and you know something about how people, the way different types of people dress in Palestine, the person in the distance who are presumably the Jew who walked away actually is dressed like an Armenian monk. There were no Armenian monks in the time of the Bible. And their dress is unique. Only the Armenian monks have this kind of hat that goes like this. The person taking care of the one on the ground, presumably the Samaritan, is dressed like a regular Palestinian peasant at the time. Samaritans are famous for their fez or tarbouche with a thing around it, so that there are certain ways in which they dress. So even the reenactment of a story is flawed, to say the least. And then we have images like this. On an image like this, I mean, I'm guessing this image is in Sebastia, which is near Nablus, from some of the landscape and the stones, but that's not what the image says. It says, the caption says, on the road to Egypt. And of course, you remember the Bible that Jesus from Bethlehem as a child was taken by his mother and father, or mother and stepfather, I suppose, to Egypt. If you go from Egypt, from Bethlehem to Egypt, you go south. You don't go north to Sebastia. It doesn't matter. We still don't know who these people are. It's not their images. Or the more common one is the so-called Judean home. That is the typical caption, where you have a grotto kind of house. You have a mother and a father and a child and a donkey and a camel, or depending what you have. And again, this we proudly Palestinian home, I suppose, but it is representing the manger and the birth of Jesus. And then there are things that are true. They're not staged, but they are paid for. The consistency in all of the collections of photographs from the 19th century, especially when the stereoscope started, of having images of the lepers. Lepers are people who have leprosy. I don't know what it is in Italian. We call it in Arabic al-burs, al-baras. I'm not saying there were no lepers in Palestine, but it's amazing that the 10 or 20 or 50 lepers that are in Palestine are consistently appear in most photographic collections. Why? Again, it's a reference to Jesus healing the lepers. Now, sometimes you have studio portraits of individuals. And you would think that this studio portrait is of, I don't know, your great-great-grandfather who went to the studio, they took his image, but no. These images were sold as a carte postale, like a postcard or something like this. And they always have some reference to a biblical connection. For example, the man appears as, these photographs from the 1880s by Doma, a French photographer based in Beirut. And it is a photograph of an Arab from Bethany. Bethany is the biblical name of a village called Al-Izariya. So at the time, no one used the term Bethany. Ironically, it reappeared when after the Palestinian Authority was established and the Arab Bank came back and opened a branch in Al-Izariya. And in English, they call it the Bethany branch, while in Arabic, Al-Izari. So I don't know, maybe they saw the images and were very impressed, who knows. So we don't know who he is. We just know he's a representative of a village that is village people that were mentioned in the Bible. Al-Izari is this town of Lazarus in the Bible, so you go, or women of Bethlehem. So again, now not Nazareth, but Bethlehem, a reference to a biblical location. Here is John Cramp, who photographed Palestine in 1861, and he actually went on a trip to Palestine, accompanying the Crown Prince, I suppose they call it, of Britain at the time. And he says, the women of Bethlehem are generally fair and always beautiful. Every traveler remarks that. Anyone here from Bethlehem? You should be.
They're all beautiful.
You're all beautiful. He says, sincerely did I regret the arrangement that denied me the pleasure of bringing home witness to the correctness of my judgment, but I was not expected to spend my time on such subjects. Though now I think it's a pity that I was so scrupulous in the discharge of my duty. So he was commissioned to go to Palestine for a particular purpose. And those purposes, Kram was with the prince, but others came for archaeological research, or they came to produce images to be posted in Sunday school books, or to photograph the Ottoman world or the exotic world, whatever it is. It's clear that there was some sort of commission. Going back to portraits, it's ironic how sometimes the portraiture is correct and sometimes it's completely invented. These are two images. The Greek Orthodox one over here to the right, is actually from the 1920s. And this is Patriarch Theodosius of the Greek Orthodox Church in Jerusalem, on top of the Dome of the Rock, Holy Sepulchre. And you can see the Dome of the Holy Sepulchre. And it's a true person. So the photo is sold as an image of the Patriarch of Jerusalem. Fine, that's wonderful. But the one next to it, from the 1880s, by Dumas again, it says, the Maronite Patriarch of Jerusalem. One needs to stop and think. Maronites are in Mount Lebanon. There are no Maronites in Palestine except in few villages in the north of the country on the border of Lebanon, like in Jish, if you've ever heard of it, or some other places. But generally speaking, there are no Maronites, but it doesn't matter, fine. But there is no Maronite Patriarch for Jerusalem. The only Maronite Patriarch is called the Maronite Patriarch of Mount Lebanon. Why would you call this guy the Maronite Patriarch of Jerusalem? Probably it sells better. Maronites to the French are known to the French because they're their allies and they're Catholics. And maybe Mount Lebanon is a bit boring, but Jerusalem might sell more because it's the holy city. So you invent the title for the guy. Maybe this was the Maronite Patriarch, maybe not. Maybe he was hired. We don't know. He certainly is dressed in the garment of Maronite clergy at that time, in the 19th century. It gets even more interesting when you look at these two images from the studio of Bonfils in Beirut. They were taken in the same day of the same guy and sitting on the same chair with the same background, with the same tile. In fact, he did not change his clothes. And they are numbered, in the catalog of Bonfils, they are numbered close to each other. I cannot see from here, but I think, there is like 630 something, and so they're numbered, clearly taken in the same occasion. In the first one to the right, the caption says, the Grand Rabbi of Jerusalem. He certainly looks like a rabbi. Or like a Jewish person dressed like a Sephardic rabbi, definitely. But in the second image, he is a cotton carder. The guy who buffs your cotton for the pillows, and when the guy who works with cotton. Now, to think that a grand rabbi has a job on the side, making an extra buck working with your pillows at home, but very unlikely, especially that in the Ottoman system, the grand rabbi and the patriarch, as well as Sheikh al-Islam and the Mufti, were political positions. They were recognized by the state and they were considered political actors besides their religious duty. They went around with guards provided by the Ottoman state, so they were rather privileged, shall we say, to think that the most privileged Jewish person in Jerusalem who collected taxes from all the Jews on behalf of the authorities is actually trying to make a buck on the side is ridiculous, which makes you wonder, is this a hired actor? Because again, I think the Grand Rabbi probably will be dignified enough not to agree to pose as something else. So this is probably not the Grand Rabbi of Jerusalem, just someone who was paid in that way. And these images, I found this online, and it's recent. I found it in 2013. It's still being used from the 19th century, hand-colored image of an olive tree and a peasant with his donkey and cow or bull over there, with the title Judge Shamgar. Judge Shamgar, who is from the Old Testament, from Judges. I don't know anything about him. I haven't researched it. Maybe I should. But this is in the website of a Baptist church in the United States. So these images are still being used. And the guy does not look to me as a judge. Again, Judge Shamgar is very unlikely to be sitting. He'll be in court. Or he doesn't look like a Shamgar again, another strange name considering the times. Even today in Hebrew, I've never encountered the name Shamgar in that sense. Now, I always wondered about what happened to the exotic Orient. Because early photography of the East tended to be about the exotic Orient, the exotic other, the belly dancer, the naked woman, the harem, the images that came to us from 1001 Nights and its translation first into French in the 19th century and then into all sorts of other languages. And when it came to Palestine, I only found one image, and I don't think we can call it exotic, but we have a woman on the left over there. You see a breast exposed, a little bit, not much, to make it exotic. And it is, and the caption says, a Bedouin from Jericho. So, okay, Jericho might not be so important religiously, but might be, Bedouins are not civilized, whatever. But it's ironic that the same photographer in the same studio in Beirut took this picture and took another picture of another woman exactly in the same pose, exactly with the breast exposed, and here she's called a Bedouin from Beirut. Now, you've been to Beirut, and you know how many Bedouins are in Beirut, you know where the tents are, and Beirut is a coastal city. If you know about, even in the 19th century, Bedouins tend to be in desert areas, and that's why they're Bedouins. They move looking for water. They don't live in cities where they will cease to be Bedouins the minute they live in a city, where there is water and garden and private property, etc., etc. They cease to be nomadic. So you cannot imagine, even from the entire Lebanon, that there are Bedouins. But if there are, most likely they will be in the Bekaa Valley, not in the Bonfils studio in Beirut at the time.
Covered breast.
Exactly, and very unlikely, exactly. So even the attempt to create the exotic is so shy in the case of Palestine that it's almost as if it's a sin in this holy land to have images of the regular Orient. Now, I'm not saying that is a regular Orient to have naked women and belly dancers and harems all the time, but that's how the East was seen by the Europeans. This is what we call Orientalism. But in the case of Palestine, even Orientalism was different. It was a biblical kind of Orientalism that did not want to touch the theme of exotic in any way. And the last thing I noticed, it's not the last thing in my presentation, but in looking at these images, is this trend. And here we have three images by three different photographers. The first one on top is 1870s, the one underneath it is 1890s, and the one that is hand-colored is from the early 20th century. Three different photographers took the same location, the same view from the same angle, and even waited for a similar number of donkeys and camels to come and exactly be in the same location, and entitled it The First View of Jerusalem. No religious significance or any significance here, but it is as if anything that was photographed before me becomes significant, and I have to, it's like going to the Eiffel Tower. You have to take the same picture that is taken 100 times a day or 1,000 times a day for over the last 150 years. But what makes it the first view of Jerusalem? If the pilgrims and the travelers came to Jerusalem from Jaffa, where they arrived by sea, this view is from the south, and Jaffa is to the west. This will not be the first view they will see. This is a view if they come from the direction of Bethlehem. And it could be the first view after the train station was built in the very late 19th century, 1890s, close to that location. But before that, what was first about it? We don't know. It is as if there is a need to reproduce. I put this here not because it's a problematic in any way, but there's this feeling that photographers, like in Orientalism, where you have this intertextuality, where people you find the same text in various books influenced. Travelers wrote more or less the same journey, tried to see the same people because someone else wrote about them before. We get the same feeling when we look at photography. Now, it's okay, I'm gonna skip this. Looking at pictures, I remembered the work of Roland Barthes in a small book called Camera Lucida. And Roland Barthes, in fact, I read Barthes after I did my initial research, but he seemed, I thought he was describing what I was doing, says that there are two ways for the viewer or the spectator to experience a photograph. And he calls these two ways the stadium and the punctum. And the stadium basically is your first reaction when you look at a photograph. Yeah, you look over there and you say, oh, cityscape, buildings. And that is usually conditioned by what you know, your previous knowledge. That's about it. But punctum, he says, is the deeper, is the way to be able to interpret what the photographer did not intend to appear in the picture. In other words, you could simplify it and say there is a surface level and there is a depth. And the depth is not necessarily there all the time, and is not necessarily intended by the photographer. You as a spectator or as a viewer can place that depth in there based on your knowledge, historical knowledge, general knowledge, culture, etc., interest, the way you view things, but also based on what is outside of the frame, which you can think, and this is a term from Ariella Azoulay, who talks about what's outside of the frame. And there you can basically flip the image on its head, in a way, or to say you can decolonize the image. Like all the images of the people I had before, now Palestinians, whether they intended to or not, whether it's in books or on Facebook, look at these images and say, a Palestinian man from the 19th century. In fact, some people on social media invent names even. They will tell you this is a famous character from whatever book. And that is what I try to do. And let's take just one example of Zionist photography. Zionist photography is a latecomer on the photography of Palestine. In fact, most of the 19th century photographers were Europeans. That includes Europe's colonies in the Americas, North America, and in Australia. So they were Europeans. And photography became a local trade towards the end of the 19th century with local photographers, mostly Armenians, taking images, reproducing for the tourist market, basically, taking similar images to what the Europeans were demanding, the tourists who came to various places in Palestine. Jews in Palestine and Muslims in Palestine were late to practice photography. Very late because of certain religious teachings in both traditions against iconography. So the first Jewish photographer in Palestine was an immigrant from Russia, part of the Zionist migration, which they call the second Jewish migration or second Aliyah, and he took this picture. And this is a highly celebrated picture of the founding of Tel Aviv. And here we see the man from in distance, presumably from the Jewish National Fund, which was going to pay for the building of this colony, and Jewish immigrants appearing, standing there waiting for some sort of lottery to see which plot goes to what person. And it's often used to illustrate how Zionists made the desert bloom. Another theme, not only they used a land without a people, which already we've seen photography help us imagine Palestine as a land without a people, but here making the desert bloom is the whole idea. Now, the photographer who took this picture actually, clearly, was standing with the Mediterranean Sea to his back. This is not the desert, this is the beach. And so in the beach you only see the sand. Had the photographer moved little bit to the right, this is what would appear. The city of Jaffa, the largest city in Palestine at the time, and a very important historical city and a vibrant modern city at the time. Had he moved little bit, this will appear. So this is where I look for outside of the frame. You need to investigate and see what's missing in this image. Furthermore, and this is not from that image, but a movie, the first moving pictures, Zionist moving pictures in this case, because Lumiere brothers came to Palestine before, taken in Palestine, documents the same event of the founding of Tel Aviv. And this is all 1909, and Bin Dov is the name of the filmmaker in this case. If you look at this image from another angle, it's ironic that you see on top of the hill some Palestinian-looking fallahin or peasantry-looking people looking, curious. Who are these people? What they're doing? Let's see. The kind of curiosity. In a way that pokes hole in the whole theme of making the desert bloom and an empty land that is desert. They are there. They ruin the picture, whether they intended to or not. But you see them. You can always. This is the punctum, I suppose, as opposed to the other one here is just the surface. You see people, wow, So you need to go a little bit outside of the image. And with this, I usually because I always talk about, whenever I talk about photography, I love to end with this picture. This is the Jerusalem, old city of Jerusalem. This is called the Damascus Gate, or we call it in Arabic, Bab al-Amud, and in Hebrew, it's the Nablus Gate. Whatever the name is, this is the main gate of Jerusalem. Historically, where people came from the direction of either Nablus or Damascus, and usually it's a happening place, but it's empty here. Fine. This is very early image, and so it's completely empty. But if you look carefully in the image, you will see a shadow of maybe a donkey or a goat, or I'm not sure, and a shadow of a man. My guess is that when the photographer, early photographer, took this picture, before there were the celluloid films, there were glass negatives. So photographers would go into their tent in the dark room, put chemicals, emulsion on the plate, put it in the camera, go outside, take the picture, then go back to the dark room, develop the picture, print, and then wash the glass negative to reuse the glass for another negative. And maybe the photographer failed to clean it well, that there are spots there from a previous image. And I think these are the spots that pokes a hole in the entire narrative that it's a land without the people. Even if they are shadows in the background, they are there in a way that is haunting anyone who thinks otherwise. And I think I'll conclude with this. Thank you for being wonderful listeners.
Thank you very much, Issam, for this nice presentation. I give the floor to Mattia immediately to open the debate.
Thank you. Actually, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to Daniela and Sara, and it's a great honor to sit beside Professor Issam Nassar. And it's
You
too...
close it,
Oh.
switch it off,
Ok.
and then I'll give you this.
Posso anche staccare.
Sì. Riaccendilo.
Sì. And it's too difficult to speak after you. Actually, I prepared some thought, but before I just want to take some reflection on what you presented, and there are some funny things, if you can say like this. So there was a film some years ago, and it was the Christ Passion by the actor was Mel Gibson, if I'm not wrong. In Italy was advertised by saying, "Oh, we have a film with the ancient Aramaic, so the language of Christ." Actually was not an ancient Aramaic, but was the Neo-Aramaic that was spoken, if I'm not wrong, in Ma'alula in Syria. So it's the little village in the center, if I'm not wrong. In South, yeah. And it was so strange because you say, "Oh my God, this Aramaic," but it was not Aramaic. It was like my professor said at the time. It's like if we watch a film on Roman Empire and let's pick the actors in a modern Roman. So it's the same example. And another thing is linked to the touristic advertisements right now. For example, the first time I was in Egypt, it was in 2010. I thought, because through films and so on, pyramids were in the desert. It was not like that. It was in Giza, and that is not city center, but there is the city close to pyramids. And these images brought us to think about how foreigners, but also not only foreigners, but also natives, in this case, for example, the industry of tourism in Egypt, for example, so just propose this kind of photograph and imaging of the places. And in this sense, I think that photography could have, of course, a double use. You focus on how the foreigners and photographers represented Palestine at the time, but I read your book, Camera Palestina, and I discovered the other side, if you want. And I think photography has all the arts: music, painting, films and so on, has this double use, so the stereo and the punctum. But if, for example, music or arts, the punctum is more present, if you want, photography can distinguish the both sides. And in this sense, photography in the first sight could tell us an hypothetical reality. So in this sense, the reality was manufactured. But on the other, if we think about all the Armenian photographer of Palestine, gave us another impression of the context at the time. Why I'm telling this? Because I think we are talking about a crime. I really like investigative films, police films, stuff like
Crime
that.
stories.
Crime stories. And who is the person who represents the context? The photographer. So the photographer is part of the team of the investigation. And the photographer is the person who gave the investigator the context of where the crime was committed. And I think when we think about the history of Palestine, the erasure of Palestine in 1948, and that photography has a central role in two main aspects, and I just want to retake your book, Camera Palestina. So the first one is the fact that the book deals with, for example, Ottoman and Mandate Palestine. So it means that the book is talking about the moments before the crime. And we see a scene with all the proofs of what the environment was and the context was. That was not a terror lives, and it was not a terror and a land without people, but of course this was a land with all its characteristics. The second aspect is directly linked with the present time, I think. And the book gave us the opportunity also to better understand the importance of maintaining memory. That is not nostalgia, as you said in your book, but it's just a memory. And just to recatch what the past told us. And this, in this sense, I think, is very, very central. The photography as used in these terms. The synthesis of these two aspects, so just remembering the scene before the crime and taking the crime into the present time, I think is explained in also in the representation of Palestinians, or in your case, the archive of Wasif Jawhariye, was the importance of the, not only in their value, the value of photography, as of course, has their own importance, but also how they are intertwined in their destiny with that of their people. For example, for example, Wasif Jawhariye recashed his album through all the difficulty of an occupied land. If I'm not wrong, it was the archive was in Jerusalem, narrowed behind a wall and so on. And so he gave all the information to his brother, not his brother, brother-in-law. And so we see that how memory, not only of the person, but also of the objects, suffered as the people. Yeah. And this kind, why? Because they defend in some ways the proofs before the crimes. And I think in this way, the photography and the history of photography and the history of Palestine through photography is very important. In this little intervention, my question is, so the photography you presented is Muslim-free, if we can say. Sorry if I say this sentence, but obviously is connected and linked to what happened and how this could support what happened after this time. So how it was functional to the erasure of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want me to
Thank you.
respond
Maybe we
or-
can open the floor to the public and see if we collect other questions or comments.
You this
And then we give back the
using my own
floor
words.
to Issam. or the, yeah, ok. Yeah. Puoi venire qua così ti sentono pure da...
Yeah. If you don't want to
answer. I have more of a consideration and then a very simple question. It was extremely interesting to witness the fabrication behind the imagery that you showed us. It reminded me a lot about another work that we looked recently, which is this rediscovered video of flowers.
I was thinking about that as well.
In Palestine by this very young, very great director, Theo Panagopoulos, Palestinian Greek director, and he rediscovers basically this family, this video of Palestine from the region where his grandparents are from. And he shows how also the environment is a witness basically to this fabrication. This documentary is called The Flowers Stand Silent Witnessing. It's very interesting and won different prizes. And so this is just like a connection I made, no, between these two work, which resembles like each other a lot, and I think they can complement each other a lot also. And my question is instead, like, beside the fact that we have silent witnesses, like human witnesses, and environmental witnesses, the animals, the flowers, and the environment in general. Today we have another kind of fabrication through photography that we can call a 3.0 fabrication, which is not only what we see, I speak as an Italian, in media, in traditional media, but as well through AI fabrications of what Palestine is and how Palestine is, or Israel in this sense, is marketed by this new media. How do you think Palestinian can resist this fabrication? What can be done to resist this fabrication? And most importantly, what can be done to give people the tools to discover these fabrications, which, as you showed us, are not so easy to be detected. You know, if you don't have the tools, if you never studied photography, if you don't have an idea of what imagery is, and so on. So that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm not an expert and I haven't read your book. I'm just coming to the topic as a historian of Africa, south of the Sahara. So I've got two minor questions. One has to do with the image of people with leprosy. And I wonder if, as you said, it could be interpreted as, what is it you said again? Sorry.
Related to the story of Jesus healing.
Yes, to the story of Jesus, exactly, to biblical images, or whether it's yet another step in the construction of the colonial subjects. Because, for example, I think about British colonial policies in urban Africa, south of the Sahara, and there is this obsession with leprosy as an urban disease. So segregation of space also to try and keep Africans away. So I'm just something that occurred to me as you were talking about leprosy and the Bible, but that might be another element. And then the other question has to do with